this one's a classic, the story of Rindercella. Now, I tell it in the style of the late Reverend William Archibald Spooner, who is known for his accidental slips of the tongue, which we now call Spoonerisms. Now, the fact that he is the late Reverend may have something to do with the time that he attended dinner at Buckingham Palace and said, "3 cheers for our queer dean," right in front of Victoria herself. But I'm not a historian, I'm merely a storyteller. So, here we go. Once upon a time, in a corn country, there lived a very beautiful girl, and her name was Rindercella. Now, Rindercella lived with her muggly other and her 2 sad bisters, and in the same corn country, there was a very pransome hince. And this pransome hince was going to have a bancy fall, and he'd invited people from riles amound, especially the pitch reaple. Rindercella's muggly other and her 2 sad blisters went out to buy some drancy fesses to wear to this fancy fall. But Rindercella could not go, because all she had to wear were some old rurdy dags. Finally, the night of the bancy fall arrived, and Rindercella couldn't go, so she just cat down and scried. She was a kitten there, a-scryin', when all at once there appeared before her Gary Fodmother, and she touched her with her wagic wand, and there appeared before her a sig boach and hicks white sources to take her to the bancy fall. But now she said to Rindercella, "Rindercella, you must be home before midnight, or I'll turn you into a tumpkin." When Rindercella arrived at the bancy fall, the pransome hince met her at the door because he had been watching behind a wooden window, and Rindercella and the pransome hince danced all night until midnight, and they lell in fove. And finally, the mid-clock struck night, and Rindercella staced down the rares, and just as she beached the rodham, she slopped her dripper. The next day, the pransome hince went all over the corn country, looking for the beautiful girl who had slopped her dripper. Finally, he came to Rindercella's house. He tried it on Rindercella's muggly other, and it fit and did. He tried it on her 2 siggly usters, and it fit and did. And then, he tried it on Rindercella, and it fit did. It was exactly the sight rise. So they were married, and lived heavily ever hapwards. Now, the story of the Maury is this: if you ever go to a bancy fall and want to have a pransome hince loll and fove with you, don't forget to slop your dripper. Alright, this next story is pretty different, so brace yourself. See that bald spot up there near the peak of the mountain? It used to be a homestead. This family lived there, an old man and his 3 sons. They kept to themselves, mostly, especially in the winter when it got too icy to come down the mountain. The story I'm about to tell you happened during one particularly harsh winter. The old man's name was Joe, and his sons were Arlo, Theo, and Bo, all young men not far into their 20s. They prided themselves on being self-sufficient, not needing anyone else. They had a stockpile of root vegetables and salt pork and such, and they would hunt on the land around their one-room cabin. Usually, that was more than enough to get them through the winter. But one winter was much colder than the ones before, and it just kept going, well after the groundhog had said it was supposed to end. Now, as you might imagine, Arlo, Theo, and Bo, being young men, got real hungry, splitting wood and going on longer and longer hunting trips as the wild animals became harder to come by. So, by the time the big snowstorm hit, they'd already been out of meat for a while. We'd never had a snowstorm that bad before, and Lord willing, we won't have another one anytime soon. All the houses were snowed in, all the way up to the roof, and Old Man Joe's cabin was no exception. So he and his sons were stuck with nothing but a few sprouting sweet potatoes and whatever cornmeal they could shake loose from the empty bag. After a few days of this, the snow had melted down to about windowsill height. The men decided that one of them ought to climb out the window and try to find some food to bring back to the others. Bo was the youngest and the lightest, so he bundled up and strapped on some snowshoes and headed out the window to rustle up a squirrel or something, anything to eat. Now, they must have forgotten to secure that window properly, because not long after sundown, the Old Man Joe noticed a pair of eyes reflecting the firelight from a dark corner of the cabin. He was the sort of man that kept a hunting knife strapped to his leg at all times, and when he realized the opportunity that had snuck in through the window, he slowly and quietly drew the blade. Arlo and Theo hadn't seen the creature yet, but they saw their father get out his knife, and so they drew theirs too, and followed Old Man Joe's gaze to the pair of eyes shining in the dark. Old Man Joe was up in years, but he could be quick when he wanted to, and his empty belly was a strong motivator to spring at whatever animal was unlucky enough to find itself in that cabin. It snarled and leapt out of the way, tufted ears pulled back against its head in anger at the attack. Old Man Joe had been hunting the wild game of the mountain for decades, but even he didn't recognize the creature as it was flushed out into the light. It was covered in dark black fur and about the size of a hunting dog, but its proportions weren't canine at all. Its paws were too big, for one thing, and its tail was nearly twice the length of the rest of its strange body. It was the tail that Old Man Joe managed to get with his knife. Once Arlo and Theo helped him corner the thing, he chopped the fluffy appendage right off while swinging his sharp blade at the frightened creature. It screamed. A very human scream, which startled Arlo and Theo so much that the animal was able to slip past them and scramble out the slightly open window. Old Man Joe scolded his sons for letting it get away, but even a little meat was better than nothing, so he set to skinning it and told the boys to start melting snow for soup. They slurped up the resulting broth and chewed on the small bits of meat that had fallen off the bones. It was only after they had sucked all the nutrition out of each and every vertebra that they realized they had neglected to leave any for Bo. The men agreed that with the soup gone and their story so unbelievable, what with the strangeness of the creature and all, it would be best to just do without telling Bo about it. And, that way, if Bo did manage to bring anything back, they could eat some of it too, and he'd be none the wiser. Just as they finished hiding the bones, Bo returned with a knapsack full of pine bark. The other men teased him for failing to hunt anything but a stationary tree, but they ate their share of bark, all the same, without sharing what had just happened. It was probably around midnight when the tapping started. Just a tap, tap, tap on the now locked window. Quiet at first, and then louder. Tap, tap, tap. Old Man Joe grumbled and then told Bo to shoo off whatever fool owl was interrupting his sleep. But when Bo looked through the window, the eyes staring back at him were that of the creature from before. It opened its mouth, long teeth gleaming in the moonlight, and began to speak.
Well, how do you do? Hi, hello. I'm here for my Taily-po.
Bo scrambled away from the window and turned, trembling, to his father, who had heard the creature just as clearly as his son. Old Man Joe shouted, "You're too late, beast. It's gone. Just like you ought to be. Go on and get." He had a sensible policy not to eat anything that could talk, so he'd lost all interest in catching the rest of the critter.
"Give me what's mine, and I'll gladly go. Taily-po, my Taily-po,"
it responded. At this point, Theo was scared out of his mind. The middle brother, bless his heart, had the most cowardice out of the three and less sense than the good Lord gave a goose, so he thought it was a good idea to take a shotgun and fire at the creature, right through the closed window. Glass shards flew every which way, and the creature, somehow without a single scratch on it, pounced through the opening and onto Theo. It clamped its jaws around his neck and dragged him backwards, flailing through the shattered window like a mother cat scruffing her kitten. Old Man Joe, Arlo, and Bo just stared in shocked silence until, eventually, Arlo declared that he would go and check on his brother outside, since, after all, he was the strongest, so the critter would be no match for him. Arlo slid open the destroyed window and peered out into the darkness. The moon provided enough light to see the trench in the snow, stretching from the window and disappearing into the woods at the edge of the property. There was a faint, gurgling sound coming from just past the trees. Whether it was the creature or Theo was impossible to guess. Arlo clambered out the window and followed the drag marks through the snow, brandishing his knife, until he too was hidden from sight by the dark pine trees. When Arlo didn't come back from the woods, Old Man Joe decided it would be best to barricade the broken window and wait until morning. He pushed his heavy wooden wardrobe in front of the broken window and did his best to sleep until sunup. When he woke, Bo was rocking himself back and forth in the rocking chair, staring into the fire. He probably had been all night. His eyes were red from lack of sleep or maybe from crying. Old Man Joe reminded Bo that he was quicker and that he owed it to his brothers and, of course, the man that raised him to go and find out what had happened outside. Bo obediently climbed out the undamaged window, but he headed in the opposite direction of the trench in the snow. Old Man Joe assumed that he went for the axe in their woodshed. Bo always was the smart one. Before long, it was noon, and Bo still hadn't come back. Old Man Joe was really starting to get nervous then, without his boys to help him. He spent the rest of the daylight sharpening his knives, preparing his guns, and barricading the rest of the windows with the newly vacant beds. He was older and wiser than his sons, and he wasn't about to get caught unawares by some wild animal. Just after sunset, he heard it scratching on his door.
"I know, you know, and I know that all I want is my Taily-po."
"I ate it," he replied. "I ate it. There's no returning it. Tell me what you've done to my sons."
"I got most back, just a third to go. I'm coming for my Taily-po."
Before Old Man Joe got a chance to contemplate what the creature meant by "got most back," its claws burst through the once solid wooden door. It had carved itself a hole, just large enough to wriggle through, and it stalked towards him on its two large paws. My friends that live at the base of the mountain claim that they heard the screaming echoing through the valley all the way to their house. Well, they and Bo, that is. Once he saw his brothers disemboweled, neatly, groin to gullet like a cleaned deer, he decided that his best bet was to head for town. So he wasn't in the cabin when the fire started. It burnt all the way to the ground, which is why that's just an empty clearing now. A few people tried to take advantage of that, set up a hunting blind, and wait for some deer to come. They never caught any, but they did overhear someone saying,
"I'm so happy, happy so. I'm so happy, happy so."
I'd recommend that you stay here in the valley, by the campfire where it's safe. I've brought plenty of stuff for s'mores. No need to resort to Taily-po meat.